industry dominated by high-budget AAA games, it's easy to forget that video games are an art form at their core. With a compelling scenario, polished mechanics, and the right toolset, anyone can make an enjoyable game. These little indie games serve as a reminder that sometimes the most compelling narratives can stand without flashy graphics or next-gen gameplay. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at one of these games, a short little story-driven RPG called TinkerQuarry. Before we begin, I want to provide a couple of warnings. First and foremost, this video is going to contain heavy spoilers about the game. We'll be going through essentially the whole game, analyzing every bit of what works and what doesn't. So if you haven't played the game but want to, I suggest picking it up first at the link in the description. Also, if you purchased the gigantic itch.io BLM bundle back in May 2020, this game is in the bundle, so you can go play through it right now. If you want to watch anyway, having never seen the game, you should also be warned that this game is quite a bit unsettling. It has some blood and gore and some very chilling and disturbing scenarios. There are thankfully no big elaborate JPEG-type jump scares like on Newgrounds, but the gore and the startles do sometimes come out of nowhere, so be ready to see some of that. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dive into the game. TinkerQuarry was developed by a person called Hallowraith under the label Capresent Games. They used the RPG Maker 2003 software, and the game was incrementally released before getting a final release on Steam and itch.io on September 13th, 2019. Immediately, the choice of development tools sticks out as a bit odd. RPG Maker 2003 is a very old piece of software, with several other versions of RPG Maker having come out since then. So why would the developer make a game on this platform when newer versions exist? There's quite a few possibilities. The prohibitive price of a license for newer software, backwards compatibility with required assets, or just plain familiarity with 2003 over newer software. I stick to VX Ace for similar reasons, so it's natural that some developers would stick to 2003 in the same way. It doesn't impact the game's quality at all. The game uses a whole host of custom assets like hand-drawn art and a smooth soundtrack. It's just that why is a natural question that one might ask when seeing that the game was made on such an old toolset. Now the game describes itself like this. Waking up in a strange room within an ethereal dollhouse, a young girl must travel with her rabbit companion to escape the confines of the rat and tinker-infested halls. By exploring each floor, they will be tasked with puzzles and strange etchings, hostile and amiable sentient toys, and vicious creatures. All the while being stalked by the being known as Stay a While, aiming to trap not only the duo, but everything existing in his world. But the true story is a little bit different. Let's break it down. After some brief setup and naming our character, the game begins with a pan shot of a tall building floating in a dark void. Somewhere inside the building, a rabbit drags what looks like a doll down a long hallway. At the end of the hallway is a set of mirrors, and an ominous red figure shows up in the center mirror. After a few seconds, a tall, spindly creature dashes behind the pair, and there's a cut to black. Damn, this 1-minute wordless intro already has me asking so many questions about what the heck is going on here. Where are we? Who's that? Who's that? Is that me? Where's this? What are these? Who's that? And who's that? Who's good? Who's bad? What's even happening here? This is how to do an intro. Don't just tell me a text dump of backstory. Show me something cool that I can sink my teeth into. Let me experience the game and give me an intro scene that forces me to go discover what it means in the world of the game. Very well done, TinkerQuarry. After the fade out, we awaken in a furnished room with the big spindly thing, some kind of clock dog hybrid, staring us down. But they seem oddly cordial about the whole thing. They address us as Dizzy, or the name you input, but I'm just going to use Dizzy for consistency with the clips. They seem concerned about our well-being, and mention that we didn't used to be that small, but they say that'll help us play together. Then they ask us to stay a while. That doesn't sound like any character from the description at all. So the Five Nights at Freddy's looking guy challenged us to a race, and now we're free to explore around. Other than a tutorial diagram and a snippet of a poem on the clock, there's nothing in this room. Down the hall, there's an item called the magic parcel in the left room, which we immediately put on. And the only other accessible room is the rabbit from the intro sequence. The rabbit addresses us as Adeline and says that his name is Peter. He claims that we're actually not Dizzy, but someone named Adeline, and that we need to leave before Stea, the big springy clock dog from Toy Story 2, realizes that we are this Adeline person and traps us here. His legs no longer work, so Peter asks us to carry him in our magic parcel, and we are somehow able to add him to the party. We meet Adette, the music box who functions as the game's save point, and then we enter the combat tutorial. First of all, the combat track is a total banger. The soundtrack for this game was primarily composed by Antrich Bali just for the game, and it's super cool, especially in combat sequences like this. Second of all, we can notice a custom battle interface with visible battlers surrounding the enemy sprite. It's clear that a lot of effort went into this system, and it really makes the game feel like the labor of love that it is. If we accept Peter's offer for a battle tutorial here, he actually dumps a little bit of lore intertwined in there that you don't really ever get to hear otherwise. Enemies, and apparently all toys, contain something called an essence, which grants them power in addition to defining who they are to some degree. Peter reveals that his essence is hope, but we don't have an essence, since we're apparently just a really small human. We have something strong, apparently, which the character menu claims is a full soul. Peter also says that enemies will turn gray when they lose most of their health, and that when they're defeated, they're impaired and left in an immobile limbo state. So we beat up on this mouse for a little while, and Christ, that's gory as hell. When he said turn gray, I thought he meant like a fade out, but no, the mouse gets covered in blood and cuts and ugh. Then you kill it and you take its teeth. I'm pretty sure rats have fewer teeth than that. DuckDuckGo claims that they have 16. These definitely aren't normal rats. Anyway, we take its teeth. Yeah, then continue. We meet a shopkeeper, Walter, who reveals that everyone is being kept in their rooms by Stea, and we grind teeth from the rats outside to buy his best equipment for both Dizzy and Peter before continuing on. In the shop, I noticed that there were separate healing items for humans, softies like Peter, plastics, and tinkers, which indicated to me that I'd maybe be getting some more party members. I think that's a cool way to tie gameplay and story together, since obviously you need specialized equipment to fix different sorts of toys. Downstairs, we bump into Stea, who becomes angry when he notices Peter is out of his room and attacks. This is where I noticed the enemy actually turned grey like Peter claimed they did. Stea's essence is also in the shape of a clock, which is a little bit interesting. We learn about the rats, who apparently endlessly spawn from the black voids in the walls and are some sort of unstoppable otherworldly force. The information comes from the notes of someone named Clint, who claims to have done experiments on them. Continuing on, we meet a sleepy big boy, a bird who offers to heal our whole party, and we get a key in the sink. The key opens the storage room upstairs, which has a screwdriver inside. This allows us to sneak through certain vents. One cute little detail is that the very first time you enter a vent, it drops a little just in case line, which is a nice way to give the sense of fear our character faces while being stalked. Entering a room that was previously sealed through the vents, we find, something horrible happened to this room. The black rat ichor stuff dripping from the walls has totally overtaken it somehow. The idea that this stuff is consuming the dollhouse so close to the room you were just in is more than a little terrifying. In fact, there's actually a second sealed room just like that on the lower floor, right next to where we fought Stea. Yeah. Out on the balcony, we can use the screwdriver we got to open up a grate in the floor. In this room, we find what looks like a deactivated wind-up soldier. Peter clearly has some thoughts, but he doesn't really elaborate. We pop out in the room with a toy named Lori and scare her off. Peter tells us to go ask her to help, and we grab a flashlight she dropped and follow her trail of red scarf fluff up to the previously dark 4th floor. Now this part's a little bit weird. There's a mechanism here that's clearly set up to impede our progress. The note reads, "To continue, fill this doll with life." You'd think it'd be a puzzle, but what that really means is just go around the dark floor hunting down and impairing teddy bears and dumping their impaired bodies into a chute. And they just pull a switch several times until the bear pops and you get a roof key. Thematically, it makes sense, I guess. Impaired toys aren't actually dead, so you're somehow siphoning their life into this one? Maybe? It's kind of a reach. But it's never really explained or contextualized why this is there. It's perhaps one of the few things in the whole game that doesn't really make much sense to me in terms of narrative. Did Stea put it there? Did someone else put it there? Is it just part of the house? Well, whatever the reason, we crush the teddy bear battles with our overpowered plastic shields, and then we just keep going. When we're out on the roof, we get some items and meet our first real boss battle. This green dragon girl, Sarah, freaks out when she sees us up here, because we give away her hiding place. Peter tries to talk her down, but she attacks us in self-defense. It's at this point that I realized Dizzy learned a really powerful combat skill while fighting the teddy bear softies called something special. It does enormous damage, like seriously huge, and you'll have enough SP to spam it against any boss. It's just crazy. So Sarah goes down really easily, not a threat at all with this skill. She falls off the roof and impairs herself. Peter then suggests that we go harvest her essence, saying we can equip it like a weapon. But then he immediately backpedals, and clarifies that it might piss off anyone allied with her. This terrified me enough to let it be, but this is actually a choice, and I'll be going through the consequences of it later on. Heading to the 4th floor proper with the key Sarah had, we immediately get a red flash, and we go into a sort of flashback sequence sort of thing. We're wearing red clothes, walking down a hallway, and we see the woman in red from the intro mirror. When we interact with her, she suddenly falls over, and after a cut to black, a voice asks its mother to find them a friend. Well, that's more than a little horrifying. Moving on, after that, we meet a big glass dragon named Glass Dragon. They give us a bit of a plot dump. First they tell us that Lori ran into the maze behind them. Then they ask if we're after Lori's essence, and they clarify that it would have been corrupt for us to take it. To which Peter responds, "Hey, no, we've changed. Whatever we were like in the past doesn't seem like a very good person, and we're gonna have to come to terms with that over time." Glass Dragon also asks us to activate a peculiar looking device for him if we see it. Sounds like a side quest. We also get the next part of the grandfather clock poem, and we go into the maze. The maze is full of slightly tougher rats, which, God, Jesus Christ, there's that gore again. God damn. Vermin seem like the main source of the gore in this game. So we find Glass Dragon's device powering through rats, but we lack the tools to actually activate it. We then follow Lori's fluff trail to a secret clubhouse, where Peter convinces a shady figure named Whiskers to let us in. They ask about Sarah, indicating that they're probably the friends Peter warned us about earlier. Heading inside, we find their clubhouse made of patched up bits of other floors. We find Whisker's friend Skid, and we find Lori. We explain our mission, but Lori is terrified at us being there, and mentions that Stea was apparently our favorite, not Peter. It seems like whatever happened when we owned these toys carries over to the way that they treat us now, despite our amnesia. Lori luckily agrees to help us with her essence of courage. After a long conversation in which it's revealed that Stea was the one who tore off Peter's legs after the intro cutscene, Whiskers and Skid also agree to send one of them to help us, and we can choose one of the two as our third party member. We're allowed to chat with both of them before choosing, and they give us a lot of info. Skid tells us that Clint from the journals and Stea are both Tinkers, like the title, and that Clint wanted to form an orderly society in the Dollhouse with laws, democracy, but he went missing one day. Whiskers, meanwhile, tells us that we were a troubled kid who apparently lashed out at our toys somehow. He also explains the creepy sealed rooms everywhere. He just took off bits of the walls and stitched them together over the void to make this room, and the rooms he took the walls from became all dark and plagued by rats. This makes the dollhouse itself feel sentient and a little horrifying. He also reveals that the windows suddenly turned black one day. It's kind of weird to think about what exactly happened here that made it such a weird place. We chose Skid and went on to go meet Lori. While exploring around though, Skid recognizes that the toy soldier from before is actually an impaired Clint with his wind-up key missing. We need to get his key if we have any plans to rescue him at all. We meet up with Lori. We're retreated to one of the creepiest arcs of the game. Lori ventures into the wall through the rat hole to open the door, but it eventually opens on its own without her reappearing. Trying to go through the door leads to a second flashback sequence. This time we play as the woman in red, walking down a long, long path of grass to a house. At the end, a voice tells us that the jumping dog talks and chides us for not staying home. We come to. We hear Stea barking in the distance, and then, god damn, Laura's been brutally impaled. Yeah. What's worse is that there's a trail of fur leading from the rat hole to the pole, but then there's scissors and more fur leading into another door, indicating that something took part of her corpse. Yikes. Entering that door causes the music to go even creepier. And in a very disturbing scene, we meet Stella. We learn that this creature was the one who had the magic parcel in her room, and that she owns some sort of cafe here. She mentions that drinks have a wide array of effects on humans, and then you're forced to try her concoction of coffee beans, candy, and rat blood. Holy hell. There's some stuff to unpack here. This is the first mention of the man I've seen. It's clear there's a girl, who's us, Dizzy, and the woman, the one we played as in that flashback, who's presumably the girl's mom from what we can gather. But the man, potentially the woman's husband or the girl's father, is a new character. Stella mentions seeing the woman and the man drink and it changing how they act, which is a clear allusion to alcoholism. This is a big hint that the family of the girl who owned the dollhouse wasn't exactly a happy, stable one. The adults drank a lot, and the child seemed troubled and took it out on her toys. Poor girl. Following Stella into the back room reveals that she's been harvesting Stea's killed toys for sewing materials. She has Lori's scarf as a scarf, and she wants our human leather, so yeah, this is a little terrifying. Peter calls us Adeline again in the fight, and Stella mentions that Adeline never comes into the bedroom, then attacks. I guess Adeline is the mom, and she really didn't take much care of her kid, huh? After the fight with Stella, we get Lori's essence back. But Skid asks Peter to explain what he meant by Adeline. Peter hand-waves it away as family resemblance, and Skid's okay with that. But it's clear Peter knows something that we don't. We get a fourth grandfather clock snippet, and explore the plagued halls for a password to open up the next area. We get a plastic sheet that lets us surf like in Pokemon, and we end up able to cross the black rat ichor stuff and find the clues that let us proceed. While we're over here, we find a room where Stea is breeding roaches for something. In this room, we find a paper crown and a framed picture of the girl. We'll see the exact implications of this a little bit later. This bit's cute. First of all, the chef is Fruity, who's actually the sleepy big boy dino from the kitchen upstairs. I guess he's a better chef than we thought. This cookbook is transcribed from the woman, meaning that these ingredient lists are allegedly from her real-life recipes. I don't know why her omelet includes alcohol and cough syrup, though, unless she's either that desperate or there's some author bias in here. Maybe Fruity's hitting the sauce. The proportions are also kind of funny, seeing as the bread is mostly baking soda and buttermilk. Yeah. but the omelet recipe gives you the hint you need to figure out the password. Heading inside gives you access to the res halls, a small sort of hub area. The people here are fanatical about something called the Dream Catcher, which seems like a leader figure. You get to talk to NPCs and learn a little bit more about the world. Inside Ayer's healing shop, we learn about the mirrors in the intro cutscene from a Clint note. The mirrors apparently reveal the true forms of things in the real world. This immediately raises another question. In the intro cutscene, Dizzy was reflected in the mirror as the woman in red, which is apparently Adeline. Peter saw it happen and recognizes that we're Adeline, and he seems to be the only one who knows. But Stea saw it too, and he keeps addressing us as Dizzy and treating us like everything's normal. What gives? We learn a lot of little tidbits about the lore here. Emmanuel tells us that the bears from before spawn endlessly and are harvested for raw materials, simply for something to do. That doesn't explain why we have to torment them, though. This character, K-Mime, runs a minigame nook. They have 2 games, Whack-A-Rat and a Switch Puzzle. The Switch Puzzle is sort of trial and error with the 2 to the 4th power possible combinations. But the Whack-A-Rat game is either almost impossible if you do it normally, or really easy if you exploit the cheese strat that forces rats to continuously spawn on one hole if you never move. It's kind of funny that you have to beat the rats using cheese. You also meet Tenor, a humorous little character who offers us a side quest to find his 4 missing metal birds to get an item. On the other side are 3 empty rooms of toys named Cap, Zip, and Abigail, and a scrolling storage room with a sphinx named Charles, who asks us a short Tower of Tragedy type quiz to get a silver key to keep going. While wandering around to look for Tenor's birds, I actually activated the device for the glass dragon, which dropped a bunch of stuff on him and shattered him. That's kinda sad, he seemed like a chill guy. I guess being immobile took its toll on him. It really shows you how bleak the world of the game is, to have a seemingly cool, heroic character just straight up ask us to shatter him and take his essence because he's tired of existing. Although theoretically his essence of wisdom is intact, so maybe he just didn't want to be stuck in an immobile glass dragon statue. Either way, it's a sad moment. Eventually, we enter the door at the back of the res halls with a silver key. The hall's dark at first, but we get ambushed by Stea and a pack of rats, and enter into a Dizzy-only solo battle against multiple enemies. This is the first multi-enemy fight in the game, and as far as I'm aware, there's actually only 2 in total, making hit-all skills kind of low impact in this game overall. Despite that though, I really like this fight. It's one of the few non-trivially difficult fights in the game. I like how there's a scrolling background and little lines on your character box for the motion. I like how you're solo since Peter can't run on his own and you don't really have time to take anybody out of your parcel, you just have to go. It's a very tense segment, and it's executed well. It's also one of the first segments where I seriously felt like my character might actually die. But I ended up pulling through. In the door following that, we have another short flashback. The woman, apparently Adeline, stumbles through a tiny house with a few bottles of booze and scattered papers everywhere. Heading into the hall, continuing from the last flashback, the girl says that she and the jumping dog play lots of games together, and it really does seem like he is her favorite toy. After this flashback, we collapse abruptly. These memories are apparently taking their toll on us. Inside the train is Wemblin, the Flamel storekeeper, who offers us a chance to stock up and heal for the endgame. They mention the train is plagued and stuck, but that the Dreamcatcher is close by. Continuing on, we find Clint's lab, where we see the experiments on the vermin firsthand, as well as get the mother of all plot dumps in the form of Clint's journal detailing the history and downfall of the house. Now, Clint's journal is a 30-page info dump, so I'm going to summarize it a little bit. One day, the girl disappears and stops playing with the toys. Eventually, the dollhouse windows turn black and it starts floating in the void. The toys come to life, and led by Clint, they try to establish some sort of government, as well as a resistance against the tide of rats trying to overrun the place. Then the girl shows up at the dollhouse, toy-sized and comatose. Peter takes her to the Mirrors of Truth but gets attacked by Stea and has his legs crippled. Later, Sarah pushes Abigail off the roof and she falls to the void. On a mission to retrieve her, Clint brings the comatose girl to try and wake her or send her to get help. But when she's brought far enough away from the dollhouse into the void, reality starts unraveling, and Clint realizes that her presence in the dollhouse is the only thing holding their existence together. So this journal reveals a lot of painful truths about the nature of the place. They're trapped in some alternate plane. It's them in a dark, surreal purgatory with this girl. But before you can think too much about this, an optional boss claws out of the wall and attacks as soon as you quit out of the menu. This boss is a good time to explain my thoughts on the combat. With my setup and buffs, Skid was doing over 500 damage on a normal attack, and the enemies don't even come close to withstanding that kind of damage. I killed the Rat King in like 4 cycles of combat, and he didn't do more than like 20 damage to me. This guy's supposed to be the super boss, right? The overwhelming majority of combat in this game is a narrative element rather than an actual challenge. The only non-trivial fights I can think of are the rats at the beginning of the game before you can full heal, the 1v5 tunnel chase, and one other battle I can discuss later. The rest of the fights boil down to auto attack spam and pop something special if you have to. There's no consequence to doing that since Dizzy gets a skill called Insightful Eye that lets you restore your SP for more than what it costs. Unlike other games where MP is a resource, here it becomes a cooldown timer. There's all these cool tactics and skills to try. MP drain with natural selection, inflict DOTs like spilling, buff your stats. But the RPG combat suffers from a problem a lot of RPGs have. What's the point if mashing the auto attack key kills the enemies fast for free? That's not to say that the game is bad. It's narrative focused. The game tells a story and the combat is there to represent the conflicts in the story, not really to provide a challenge. That said, I do wish there was more depth to the combat, or maybe a difficulty setting, since it is really easy. My first playthrough, I never got a single character knocked out. Instead of feeling like a lost girl in a terrifying otherworldly plane, I felt like Dante tearing through the legions of hell in Devil May Cry, and it's sort of a gameplay story dissonance. But at the end of the day, I'm here for the story, so it's ultimately not a big deal. Anyway, after digging through Clint's lab, we arrive at the hall of the Dreamcatcher. Heading inside, we get thrown into the final flashback sequence. And be warned, it's a dark one. We pick up from the last flashback as Adeline again, drunkenly stumbling through the hallway. We go through the final door to the girls' room, and we find... oh god. We find the girls' room in a state of rat-infested neglect. The toys we've encountered are shown scattered around the floor, surrounding her dollhouse. And in the bed is the girl's limp body, wearing her queen's crown, matching the king one Stea has in his room. She asks her mother where she's gone. The stress of that vision causes us to pass out when we come back in the dollhouse. When we come to, Peter and Skid are comforting us and discuss taking care of Stea on their own. Little moments like these really help with character development. Of course, it's minimally connected to the plot, but this scene and others like it help the party feel less mechanically bound and more like a pack of allies. It feels like the skits in a Tales game. The party really feels like a party. In the next room, we end up at the Dreamcatcher, a lifeless painting of an actual Dreamcatcher, modeled after what's apparently one of Dizzy's drawings, and painted with rat blood. Apparently the toys back in the res halls worship this thing. But it makes sense. Without Clint around, they don't really have much of a leader. So building a deity is the next best thing. Making it out of one of the girls' drawings acts as a sort of twisted devotion to her. Again, we have more questions than answers, and we're left to fill in the gaps. An astute viewer will notice that this background is the same one from the very first flashback. Interesting. We also get the final grandfather clock, and this one is creepy. Unlike the others, it's in all caps, and it directly mentions us, Adeline, by name. Combining all the grandfather clocks, we get a poem that's a direct parallel to the flashback sequences we've experienced throughout the game. Moving into the house, plagued by the world's largest mouse, the woman went down the hall. Through the kitchen she went, carrying the bitter scent, red liquid having stained her blouse. All of her money had been spent, she had no more for rent. The little one was the only treasure she had. But as she turned into that room, Lord help her forget what she saw. For she spent the rest of life pretending there was nothing wrong at all. And when Adeline fell dead, she did see all that her daughter intended it to be. A house where not a single thing grew, and nothing could sleep, rot, or chew. But she made one mistake. Her inhabitants were inevitably prone to some accidents. For the worst thing a goddess could possibly do was to give them free will, like me and you. At the end of the poem, you can insert all of your essences that you have into the clock, and you get an ultimate sword for doing so. I'm not sure if there's significance to this, but I chose to do it. Now we go past the point of no return, and end up in the final room of the game, the mirror room. It shows us what we look like in the real world. The mirror shows Peter as a fragile toy rabbit, and us as Adeline, the mother. Standing by the door, preventing us from leaving, is Stan. He refuses to accept the reality of what he just saw. Peter reveals that Dizzy, the girl, did die, and Stea, out of twisted loyalty, refuses to allow her to leave him. He even breaks his all-caps character quirk to grab Peter by the collar and brutally threaten him for what he's done. And so we begin the final battle against Stea. And absolutely crush him because the combat in this game is super easy. We impair Stea, and Peter guides us to the door, leading out into the void. Everyone is understandably terrified, but they come to the consensus that Adeline can't stay here. She needs to journey out into the void, away from this place, and find what really matters to her, her daughter. After a long cut to black and a hopeful piano melody, Adeline finds her daughter in the void, hands her her toy doll, Peter, and the two are reunited at last. And so concludes the story of TinkerQuarry, a poignant and beautiful tale of love, loss, grief, and atonement. Or does it? There's still two big questions left to answer. The first is, what happens if you aren't a total wuss like me and you go take Sarah's essence off the balcony? And the second, what happens if you manage to somehow revive Clint, the toy soldier? Let's play again and find out. This time we opted to take Sarah's essence, fear, after fighting her. The game continued on like nothing happened, until the middle of the Haven Quarters cutscene with Skid and Whiskers. The cutscene played out normally for the most part, but right as one of them was about to join the party, Skid stopped and demanded that we open the bag. We refused, but he slashed the magic parcel out of our hands and found Sarah's essence inside. Now it's clear that these guys are Sarah's friends, and they're understandably pissed that we've impaired her and taken her essence, despite doing it in self-defense. So they attack us in the only other multi-enemy battle of the game. Which is easily trivialized, because that something special skill is multi-target. Yeah, I figured this out on the second playthrough. It's even more broken than it already is. That's kind of ridiculous. After nearly impairing them, we try to convince them that we're doing something noble and really do need their help. But Whiskers refuses to listen to us, takes Sarah's essence, and leaves. So now we're short a party member. We're about to fix that, though. In Whiskers' drawer in Haven Quarters, we find a 4-digit code. Taking that code to a lockbox hidden in an out-of-the-way room in the rat maze grants us the wind-up key for Clint. So, we go wake him up. He greets us with noble intentions, and eventually agrees to help us defeat Stea. Having Clint with us allows us to access bits of extra dialogue throughout the whole game. After all, Clint is the one who wrote all those journals and had that extensive science lab. Many of the toys also seem to respect him, and look up to him as a leader figure. For instance, taking him to this journal reveals some of Stea's past and motivations. His real name is actually Fido the Jumping Dog, and he had a full body of fur until the girl ripped it all out and shoved a clock in his mouth as a game. He didn't care about the poor treatment though, and just considered it a form of love. He was completely devoted to the girl despite it all. The moniker "Stay a While" for him apparently came from him trying to get everything perfect for more games when the girl woke up in the dollhouse. These details recast Stea as a tragic figure, a dog who just wants to protect the person he's loyal to, despite her obvious mistreatment of him in return. Clint opens other dialogue too. Taking him to the second shop, Wilson, causes him to absolutely terrify Wilson, who immediately refers to him as boss. Whereas Wilson in the normal playthrough sells you overpriced goods, Clint pressures Wilson into explaining his deal with Stea to keep his store open, reveals that it's because Wilson has a crush on Stella, yeah, the yandere bat, and offers a 50% discount on all items because Clint scares him so much. With Clint in the party, we really do feel powerful in the dollhouse. Clint is someone with status, authority, knowledge, and respect, and he makes it known. However, something a little bit interesting happens when we take Clint to the Stella fight. You might remember that Peter accidentally refers to us as Adeline at the beginning of the fight. Well, Clint notices, and unlike Skid, he pushes on Peter's lie and pressures him into spilling everything. Clint suddenly perks up at the idea that we might actually be Adeline, and he becomes abruptly determined. In his journal, he writes that he has a degree of admiration for the woman, whereas he had more disdain for the girl. And so it makes sense that he would ever be more resolute to help Adeline instead of the girl. After figuring out that we're Adeline, Clint even begins addressing us as such in other scenes. For instance, if you go to Stea's roach place and look at the picture frame, Clint addresses Adeline directly, explaining that Stea was the girl's best friend and acknowledging that Adeline was too busy to pay attention to her daughter. Heading into the res halls, Clint is angered to find out that his authority has been usurped by the Dreamcatcher. Tira, the Dino Commander, also drops a very interesting line. Over the past decade. Time is said to be fluid in this dimension, but if they've really been in here for a decade or more, that goes to show just how much it's degraded over time. On a more lighthearted note, Tanner absolutely gushes over Clint when he meets him. He also drops what's maybe the last name of the girl's family, calling us Adeline Joyful. It could just be Tanner being himself since he is flamboyant and eccentric, but it could also just be an ironic last name. After cheesing K-Mime's game again, grabbing the key and getting chased by Stea down the hall, we come to another consequence of a choice. This one a little more poignant. In the hall between the chase scene and the next flashback, we get stopped by Stea, and we get to find out the fate of Whiskers and Skid after they left with Sarah's essence. Stea caught them, and now we have to fight a chimera of the three. The game is really punishing us for having taken Sarah's essence earlier. We had a choice between an extra party member and friend, and two tragic bosses that ultimately led to the deaths of everyone in Haven Quarters, for one decision that we ended up doing multiple times in the future without any consequence. It's a little dissonant, but it makes sense when the only characters who care are the people who are specifically said to be Sarah's friends, and they don't witness her death like they do with Lori. In Clint's lab, he leaves to gather his stuff, and we snoop through his journal again. He catches us, but we end up taking on the Rat King fight as usual immediately after. Clint has some harsh words with the Dreamcatcher that replaced him, and we continue on to the final battle on the alternate route. We once again witness the truth that we're actually Adeline, but Clint is wordless throughout the ordeal. We head into the final fight with Stea much the same way. I set up my initial buffs and start tearing away with the usual something special spam, and then, Jesus, Clint just pops out and stabs him, impairing him instantly. And then he reveals a much, much darker side of himself. He refuses to let Adeline go. He blames the man, her husband, for her alcoholism, for the death of the girl to her illness, and for her warped image in the eyes of the other toys. It turns out, Clint's journal told the truth. He's infatuated with Adeline. In his mind, her presence in the dollhouse is some sort of cosmic reward, and he attempts to persuade Adeline that he's different from the rest of them. It gets worse. He claims that the body Adeline is in is a reject, and he wants to fix it somehow, presumably with this Project Venus mentioned in his lab, so he can be together with Adeline as he desires her in the ruined void world. Yikes. The setup here, though, is fabulous. Clint is portrayed as a hero and a leader throughout the game world. Characters everywhere look up to him. They see him as a powerful person and the face of order. But behind all that, he's a creepy stalker with a crush. Just like Stead demonstrates that sometimes evil is done with a pure motive, Clint demonstrates that even the kindest face can hide darkness behind it. So now we fight the true final boss, Clint. His essence is willpower, but it's in the shape of a heart, driving home the point that this is his idea of love. We can blast through the fight and win like normal against Clint's wild protests of self-defense. And after some cold words for his scorned lover, Clint goes silent. And the ending plays out much the same as before, minus the presence of Skid. However, and I only found this while messing around with the game to test stuff while writing this, there is a hidden, more intense ending if we lose to Clint, where we see the true meaning of Project Venus. He gores Adeline and carries her off. We wake up as Peter in a small room with the head of Fido the jumping dog, who has given Peter his legs. Fido drops an F-bomb, the only time in the game I can recall anybody swearing, and tells Peter that Adeline needs him. This is his begrudging redemption. Fido admits that he was wrong, and he's finally accepted that the girl that he cared so much for is gone. He reveals that Clint has impaired every other toy in the dollhouse, calling them traitors, and is experimenting on them to make a proper shell for Adeline's soul, a body that looks like her human form as he envisions it. Peter hobbles through the now empty dollhouse on the mechanical legs, making the trek up to Adeline's room at the start of the game. He passes through a plagued res hall, which is unsettling in how empty and dead it looks, and eventually reaches Adeline's room to find it locked. He pounds on the door, pleading for her to help him. Weakened from the original injury, Adeline steals the key from behind Clint's back as he works on his vessel, and escapes with Peter. After a tense 2.5-minute black screen with a haunting piano melody, Adeline finds her daughter in the void, and everything turns out okay, thanks to Fido's sacrifice and Peter's courage. Now, for real, this concludes the story of TinkerQuarry, a poignant and beautiful tale of love, loss, grief, atonement, and obsession. A grim reminder that darkness can hide behind a pretty smile, but there might also be a spark of goodness behind evil. TinkerQuarry is a love letter to short, story-driven RPGs, in the same vein as games like Undertale, Ib, and Off. It's a passion project, and it's cool to see the creator pour so much effort into making a rich, detailed world. The combat might be a bit sparse, but that's okay. The story and the characters more than make up for it, presenting a captivating narrative full of emotion. TinkerQuarry bills itself as a horror game, but it's more than just the nutcracker but scary. It's actually an introspective reflection into humanity. The game revolves around sentient toys in a surreal, dark world, but the horrors are the mundane ones of real life. A family torn apart by alcoholism and abuse. A girl desperate to regain control, lashing out at her toys. A mother neglecting her sick, starving child. And the fear that comes from being the target of unwanted obsession. Despite its bleakness, though, the game does cast a glimmer of hope, and through its journey, offers us a lesson. Find those who support you, uplift you, and want you to succeed. Choose your own circle. Cherish those people and hold them close. They, more than anything else, are what really matters. That's about it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to click the like button. If you have thoughts about what you saw, drop a comment down below and let me know. And if you'd like to see more content like this, showcases, reviews, challenge runs, and other fun stuff, be sure to subscribe to my channel and you'll get notified as soon as they're released. Lastly, be sure to check the description to get links to this game's page, as well as to the creators of all the background music for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.